So a lease agreement coming to an end has to be actively dealt with by a landlord. We cannot just assume that everything will work itself out and on the last day of the lease, a tenant will simply pick up and leave. So today we are speaking about the end of a lease. Now, be it through a breach and termination or simply the lapsing of time, a lease will eventually come to an end. So the first thing that I want to mention is please remember with student accommodation, the same rules apply as with ordinary leases. That means that the Rental Housing Act will still apply. And you as a landlord have to be mindful of this because you should have conducted an entry inspection before the tenant moved in. And this is crucial because it will impact your exit inspection. And your exit inspection is I don't need to tell you how important it is because this is when you find out how much damage could have actually been incurred at the property. And this is where your claim against the deposit arises. So remember one thing, if a lease is coming to an end, make sure that you have your inspections in place. Make sure that you schedule them so that you and the tenant together can inspect the property before the tenant moves out. Even if it's on the day that the tenant moves out, you have to inspect this property, you have to put a list together, and you have to be able to quantify the amount of damage because this is how you're going to claim against the deposit. But this is the same rule as we've always applied with ordinary leases. So it's nothing new, it's nothing different, and it's something that you should be practicing, whether it's students, whether it's normal tenants. So that is number one, is the condition of the property and how you do the exit there. And then other things about exiting in leases. So your most one unfortunate common feature that we find, and again, this isn't just about student accommodation, it applies across the board, is tenants that do not vacate, right? Now, this happens under two circumstances. Now, the one circumstance that you sometimes find is that if there's renewal clauses in the lease agreement, or the lease agreement automatically goes onto a month-to-month lease agreement, right? Now, legislation allows this to happen. It says that if a person occupies the property past the date that the contract expired, the lease agreement is deemed to be a month-to-month lease agreement. But now the flip side also applies, and I've seen this happen with landlords quite frequently. The CPA requires that if there's a renewal clause, that the landlord has to give notice to the tenant about this renewal clause. The landlord has to advise the tenant in time that there will be a possible renewal, and the tenant can opt in or opt out of this renewal. And the problem here is that when the landlord doesn't actually tell the tenant about this and nothing happens, the landlord assumes that the tenant is going to stay on, and guess what happens? The tenant moves out on the last day, as he is entitled to do, and you as a landlord have not found a new tenant. And remember, with student accommodation, this is likely going to happen towards the end of the year, so your October, November months are when your students are going to move out. So if you want to use that property for something else, please ensure that you actually conduct the exits properly, so you know when the students are moving out, that the student isn't under some misconception that yes, maybe they will spend December there, or vice versa, you're under the mistaken belief that the tenant is going to spend December there. Because bear in mind, if the student is being funded by NSFAS, right, they're not going to pay you for that. So you need to now have separate arrangements with the student on how you're going to cover any extra month that you think the student's going to stay there. Now, another situation where a person might not move out, and this normally comes with, unfortunately, homelessness, or a person simply having nowhere to go, is when they stay on the property and you would have to evict them. All right. Now, this can happen in a circumstance where the person's breached the lease agreement. As per normal, with all lease agreements, they breach, you have to send out the notices. And I mean, there's a lot of content out there on how to do an eviction, but you have to send out the appropriate notices, giving them sufficient time to remedy the breach. So 21 business days notice to remedy the breach, after which you cancel the lease agreement and you're entitled to ask them to leave. The other situation is simply the contract has expired and you're entitled to ask them to leave because you've given them notice. So remember, if it's a month-to-month lease agreement, what do? You give them 1 month's notice and you ask them to move out of the property. Now you're sitting in these two circumstances and and the tenant does not move out. Student accommodation, normal accommodation, what do? And this is where the eviction process comes in. And we don't have to, ask you to put on your lawyer hats on how evictions work and what are the complexities. But what you need to understand is from day one, please get everything right. There's no shortcut, because every shortcut I've seen my clients take has always led to extra time being taken towards the end. So if they send the wrong notice out and say 7 days to remedy a breach, sorry, you're going to need to start again. If they cancel the lease without giving the correct 21 business days notice, sorry, start again. If you go and try and lock the doors and remove roof tiles and remove the door and whatever it is, I've actually found that angers the tenants to such a degree that they actually land up fighting back. And remember, for a tenant to fight back doesn't take a lot of effort, because all they need to do is keep showing up in court and making your life difficult. So please follow the right steps. You have to give the right notice. An attorney can do this, your software can do this. 21 business days. You have to then advise them of the cancellation, right? And tell them, we are hereby cancelling because you failed to remedy your breach. I'm not going to go into detail about the 21 business days and whether CPA applies or doesn't, because 99% of the time it will. And if you're in student accommodation, I'm almost sure that it will. Once you send out the cancellation notice, this is typically where you'd approach an attorney, because an attorney has to issue a motion in order to ask the court for an eviction, right? That's the process. That is how the court process for evictions start. We issue out a notice of motion and we basically prep everyone to know that we are going to court in order to ask this. This gets served by a sheriff, right? Now there's one more step before we get to the doors of the court and we ask the court, right? One more step. The court gives the tenant one other chance to be notified. So unfortunately, yes, it seems now we're notifying a second time, but we do have to send out a second notice. So the first notice goes out saying, we plan to evict you. Then you have to go to court just one more time to ask the court for permission to serve a second notice. And this second notice is a bit more precise, going, on this date, we're going to speak to the magistrate or the judge and we're going to ask for a court order. Once that second notice goes out, the last step in the process is actually going to court and asking for the eviction of this person and hoping that the court hears your version and the court grants you an order. And once you have that order in hand, right, this does not entitle you now to go lock the door. This has to be executed properly. You go to the sheriff of the High Court, or your attorney does at least. We appoint the sheriff, we get everything together, and the sheriff goes there with an order of court and removes the tenants from the property. Now, there's a lot of videos about this process step by step by step. So I'm not going to repeat this here. I think the importance of this is that you guys understand that the process is there. And when people ask me, oh, but just send out an eviction notice and maybe next week we'll get them out, there is no such thing, right? That does not exist. There is absolutely nothing in our law that allows for something like that. I know that people make reference to things in the US or other countries where it's allowed, but please, guys, there is no such thing as send out an eviction notice and get the guys out tomorrow. An eviction notice is either the court order, a letter cancelling the lease agreement. There is no such thing as an eviction notice. There's many notices in this process. So please make sure that you get this right.